2019 in Peru has been working on a program named Horizontes, translated into Horizons, trying to help teenagers in rural areas. And we work on 59 schools in 7 regions, and we develop socio-emotional, technical, entrepreneurship, the risk factors, and working with students throughout the process. So the educational process connects to an insertion to the labor world, or third, or university, to reduce the rates of attrition or child labor. These are the experiences and the data that I wanted to share with you. It's all for me for now. Thank you. Over. Thank you for your contribution, Omar. This is extremely interesting. The fact that the program Horizontes, or Horizons, is not only about the educational program, but uh, it also addresses other skills, so the soft skills or the emotional intelligence as part of the process for students to transition. This is important to us. In your presentation, you highlight that many of the actors in that matrix are actually the factors that have an influence in the educational scope. These are catalyst factors for child labor as well. You mentioned the importance on the specific reality at the territorial level. And for that, I would like to invite Ms. Elena Montovio, acknowledging her unique experience contributing to this debate by having been one of the pioneer leaders of the regional initiative against child labor, and now the person responsible for Sinter 4. Elena, we would like to know how professional training of adolescents can actually be reinforced, and what is the role of Sinter 4 in the South-South cooperation to advance in education and technical and professional level. Elena, the floor is yours. It is great to be able to meet with you. It is great to hear from many of the colleagues. Thank you for that question. For Sinter 4, well, we work very similar to the regional initiative. Many of the institutions related to public policies, the this is your interpreter speaking. My apologies, the audio is breaking up. Center has about 28 countries and 160 institutions. I believe that we have two angles to this question. And how is the professional training need to be? What are the aspects of the professional training for the response? Well, in general terms, I would say that there are three fundamental elements of professional training that we want to see in the region in order to offer concrete responses to families and villages affected by child labor. The systems, policies, and programs for professional training can be addressed from three angles. First, quality. It is important to identify if the service being received has quality standards. Teachers or educators, because another important aspect is the infrastructure where the professional training is going to be given. And with what materials and instruments or tools the learning experience will be provided. Those are the concepts. I go to a place where education is being incentivized with educators with a number of tools that will allow for continuity if students are receiving enough attention. But there are other aspects to consider. For example, the curriculum, uh, the funding, sustainable, public, private. What is the M&E? Who cares for the labor insertion? Is the labor insertion is sustainable? Is it an internship, 15 days? This is all related to quality. And institutions should be committed to quality. And this is a matter of concern. There is another aspect related to the relevance, and it needs to be adapted to different audiences. For example, teenagers that are at risk. This is related to their environment where they're living. For example, it needs to be adapted to productive development plans. It is important to know where we are in the 2030 agenda and other aspects mentioned by ECLAC. How can I anticipate the demand? Can I anticipate the demand in the growth process for teenagers? And the last point, equity, professional training, even though many times it is not part of the ideal scenario, which is going to university, I believe that everyone needs to make an effort to recover the credibility and the practical response that is given to many of the trajectories for because a quality training or a quality professional training that responds to clear needs. One is the need of resources because either you want to leave your surroundings or you want to include them in your family reality. And the other aspect is how to address care. Many of the teenagers have their educational continuity uh, committed because sometimes they have to provide care for family members. What is Sinterfor doing in this sense? What can Sinterfor do as part of the response to these challenges? Well, Sinterfor promotes an exchange of experiences among all the institutions that have the ability to offer innovative solutions, and it anticipated to the South-South cooperation concept, a concept that has existed for a long time. But this is a horizontal cooperation where we not only share these topics with new discoveries and new responses, but we exercise new practices with evidence. I believe that we need to work closer from the tripartite network and the social actors as to the steps to be taken to offer a concrete response for the next 10 years in the region. I am at your disposal, Razel, but I do not want to take any more of your time. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much, Elena. And of course, the South-South between the cooperation between Sinterfor and the regional initiative always offers a way or a manner of truly geolocalizing not only existing solutions, but also of innovating by sharing experiences and knowledge between peers in the region. So how have you also addressed that topic also of innovations? So I also would like to offer another opportunity to Mr. Cavero on sharing a little bit more from the perspective of UNESCO, that what are they doing or what do they advise from UNESCO to improve the public response for the transition from school to work. So how do the stakeholders or the public institutions can act or also benefit from the programs or interventions of UNESCO to facilitate this transition between the school to enter the employment world? Omar? Yeah, this is a very complex question because there are many perspectives that need to be considered or angles. I would say that the first one is to ensure, in principle, the access to education. Not only basic education, but also tertiary education or higher education. Because although we're talking about the relationship between school and work, in that professional trajectory, the life plans or the development of people imply permanent training and skills development journeys. So to have the right adequate supply that can be accessible in the territory, also with cultural relevance, as well as accessibility of income, so that there is an income barrier to be trained and to get educated. That's the first thing. In the second place, another aspect that we have identified and which is very important is that from the perspective of governance, from state governance, that we can find the articulation points between the education and work sectors, both in the management aspect as well as the part of supply and certification. And that's hard to be achieved. Not all countries have been able to achieve that at the same level. There are some instruments like some frameworks, which are mechanisms to achieve some sort of common language between the employment world and the educational world. In Peru, they have a national framework of articulations, but that articulation between school and employment also at the level of the state institutions that regulate both sectors is also one of those big challenges that need to be solved. And to that, we can also add a third factor, which is not necessarily something exhaustive or comprehensive, is that at the level of the economic and social context, that there be the necessary or enough conditions so that the people, from the moment they're children and at every different level, to find enough opportunities for them to be educated and find employment. So one of the large challenges that Peru has, and this is not exclusive to Peru, and it's all for Latin America. So we have high productivity economic sectors, but have a low capacity of absorbing the available labor available. So there's like a type of bottleneck where you are able to do interesting work at the educational or training level, but the available positions will only be taken by the 10 or 15 people, leaving many of them without the possibility of going into those positions. So not only the economic, but the structural part. So the educational perspective can also have some limitations. So those are the three factors I would put on the table to continue discussing, of course. Yes, and thank you so much for these suggestions, Omar. And yeah, I agree, because that also touches upon the point mentioned by Elena on how to anticipate the demand. How do we prepare ourselves for the positions or the employment of the future? And this is the need of structural change as well. And I think that that is important in order to facilitate a future with regards to, what's the word? Well, with regards to the efforts of the governments on increasing and expanding the production sectors in their countries. I know that time is passing by quickly, and we do have some questions from our audience, but before moving on to an open dialogue or discussion, I wanted to also give the opportunity to our focal points and government representatives and workers and employers to share with us some of the innovations or good practices or programs that they consider that exist in their countries that contribute to improve inclusivity and or the access to training or the relevant education for youth. So I'm going to go through another round to the question to Dr. Agaton. If, for example, there is any program or some sort of innovation in the country that you consider can improve inclusivity that you would like to share with our audience today. Doctor? Thank you very much, Marisa. Truly, yeah, a program that we feel very proud about from the Ministry of Labor is precisely the employment journey for adolescent mothers and fathers who are older than 14 years. So it's the route to employability, precisely because of what was mentioned before, and also what is highlighted or stressed by the study, and which in turn is related to the prevention of teenage pregnancy. And of course, if we are successful and effective as a state for the prevention of teenage pregnancy, then we could truly contribute to mitigating the risk of the work of this part of the population. However, uh, uh, in order for a large number of adolescents to remove this obstacle, and within that range of ages between the years of 14 and 18 years old, which could be the situation of getting pregnant. We're referring to teenage pregnant girls, but it would also generate for adolescent boys the responsibility of assuming the raising and the care of those babies born. So the ministry has jointly created or designed with the public employment unit a route or a journey for the employability for this group of the population, with the goal, well, not from one side, but first to avoid these, like avoiding them from abandoning school, but also to think of those strategies that can allow, as you were mentioning in the first round, to generate those decent employment conditions within the framework of adolescent protected work. And in that sense, we do want to, spark that attention. And that's where this ministry is working in making visible on that high rate of adolescent pregnancy in communities that are very vulnerable, such as the indigenous communities and the communities of Afro-descendant communities or populations, and also the migrant population. We believe that it's very important to make visible these other three additional factors of vulnerability, so that the analysis of the issue or the problem from an intersectional perspective can actually contribute to focalize the strategies of the state, and also for this ruta de empleabilidad or employment route for moms and dads who get pregnant as teenagers, and related to the Afro-descendant populations and also the indigenous communities, and also in the rural communities. So in other words, that intersectionality in hand with this program could effectively be established or constitute an effective strategy with the intention of responding to a reality that unfortunately has high rates in all the country on one side, and also on the other side, I would like to tell you that from the sub direction of labor protection, we have been working very strong on a law that the government is considering on, childhood, or children marriages. And this is a world call, it's also related to the SDGs or Sustainable Development Goals in the sense of eliminating this practice. We have participated in those practices for this, law procedure, because these early, cohabitations or early marriages, actually, exposes girls and adolescents to more child labor and adolescent labor, but also it worsens the risk of, sexual slavery and forced labor, and also domestic labor, also gender-based violence. So teenage pregnancy, that's why we believe it is so important to work on this employability journey. And that's why I'm wrapping up here that this is for moms and dads who are teenagers, because there is a gender connotation that exposes girls not only to have to abandon school, but also within the framework of child marriages and early cohabitation practices. They are exposed to these perils, but also gender violence aspects, which is, such as femicide, which is also important to be analyzed from the perspective, not only from the intersectional perspective, but also with the gender approach. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Doctor. And actually, for those of you in the audience who are interested in this, in the more detailed report that we have launched today, there is an inclusion or an integration of this perspective, not only intersectional one, but also a gender um, perspective, because the data shows or reveals the differences between the characteristics of child labor, as well as the differences between the impact of these factors that encourage or push or encourage school abandonment as well as child labor, and the differences of these factors depending on the gender of individuals who are victims or who are at risk of this phenomenon. So I wanted to, because I know that we are, over time, or we're close to ending. So I wanted to invite Marlene to give us or to share an experience or an innovation, or according to the ones that you have mentioned before, Marlene, or if there's anything else that you would like to share briefly before taking a question that we have received from our audience online. Thank you very much, Riesel. As you all mentioned, you've already commented on my prior intervention in this program. However, this question gives me the opportunity to speak more in detail on this. I was talking about the Great Metropolitan GAM Guatemala, or the Learning Network. This is a coalition of companies and business networks that come together to close the gap between the supply and the demand of the employment market through employment-based learning. This is a public-private partnership that was encouraged or promoted in 2018, and it tries to help companies to have access to training labor and also to provide youth the opportunities on, learnings from work. So it's all these ways where people can learn when they are in an employment context. So like internships and apprenticeships, and for them to get the skills to maintain and to get an employment or to get a job and to progress professionally. So we have had some better practices that will allow youth to continue with their studies and to encourage or develop soft skills that would only be able to develop within when working. Otherwise, it would not be possible. And also things that companies ask for as requirements for them to be in the employment sector. So this is quickly an experience I would like to share with all of you. Thank you very much. And I hope that in the future, we might be able to have the opportunity of getting more information about this good practice. I know that it will be of a lot of interest for all our participants today. And also to offer the opportunity to our colleague, Nayeli Dominguez, to talk a little bit about a program or an intervention that at the labor union sector they are considering or being implemented that can improve accessibility and also the access to education and training for youth. Nayeli? Thank you. Well, firstly, I would like to say that the youth unemployment rate is triple to the one for adults. And however, when youth go into or do have access to jobs, these are normally jobs that do not have, social security benefits or other benefits. So that's why it is important to encourage public policies that can collaborate to job positions of high quality. The policies of the first employment could be vital to have safe access or safe jobs for boys and girls. And for that, it is essential to have a transition of youth from school into work that will ensure their development. And for that, formal education is important, but also the training in jobs and with labor unions is important. And also to make sure that the themes and subjects can be relevant to students so that they can stay in school and to complete their high school studies or secondary studies so that they can have technical education or higher education, such as university. And so these economic transfers could also be helpful to ensure adolescents to stay in school. Also, high quality learning could be a good alternative for professional training, but we need to consider that not only from the demands of the sector, but also the expectations and the needs of workers. And within this accreditation or certification, there should be a teaching process that puts in, that will show that people already have the skills. It is important to develop a methodology that will allow us to recognize and also validate within the educational system all the knowledge that people gather and that get when they get those things in the informal economy, and that can extend the insertion of these people in high quality education. So the accreditation of the skills acquired in informal employment, this needs a recognition and validation process to validate the skills and knowledge obtained, as well as it being recognized in the educational systems. Also, the professional and formal employment, it should be added to labor union training and education in order to ensure that employed youth can go into the professional sector with all the employment rights. And in this sense, for the CCA and more than 50 offices affiliated since 2021, we had the conference of training and education called Paulo Freire. And in that conference, they approved a roadmap that since then has strengthened the role of education, or that education fulfills in the mobilization and incidence and transformation in order to collectively develop a better project of sustainable development. So that's where I'll stop. Thank you very much. Excellent. And I think that for many of our listeners today, this roadmap and its implementation will be of great interest. And we would, thank you beforehand to share with our networks this information, because the active participation and the support of the union sector in that strengthening of the education of youth, of children, to facilitate their transition into the employment sector is key. And to end, because we are right about time, but to wrap up, what came from the questions that we received, the question around if it's considered necessary or relevant, the participation of adolescents in the creation of the protection plans and programs for their rights. And I would say, or I would add, Riesel says, their participation in the creation or development of these plans, programs, policies, both in the educational area as well as in the employment area. And to close, I'm going to address this question first to my colleague Omar to get his opinion or his thoughts for this question, and finally to Elena to get also her inputs on that point. Omar? Thank you, Russell. Yeah, I think it is important to engage boys and girls in the interventions, both in the educational scope as well as the employment scope, like you have differentiated in the educational area, because finally, no matter how much you can do studies with interviews and statistics to understand the issue or the problem of boys, girls, and adolescents, it's not the same than as having them as stakeholders to think from their perspective what they think is most, adequate, what can pick up the most expectations, because these are not passive, subjects or actors. It's not that they give us a sign or an intervention to know what's needed, but they're actually active actors, and their expectations change throughout time. Their specific conditions are also very diverse. So their participation as part or as, you know, as permanent actors or participants is fundamental, and also in the employment sector, because at least the impression that I have, for the years that I've been studying employment in Peru, many times the issue in Peru, the issue of employability tends to privilege, for example, one side of the employment sector, which is the employer productive sector and the needs that the employer sector has in matters of competencies or skills. But it tends to be forgotten or lost, at least from the academic perspective, what it is that workers are looking for. So students that pursue a career or study, they don't do it necessarily for the economic retribution that they will get. There's other elements like a life plan, life career, or vocation, and also the employment part on what they believe that could be an adequate or proper job that can have a final, a life trajectory or road. So to include, workers, female and male, in the different stages, and now talking about adolescence, it is important to understand what types of policies that we are designing that could encourage an inclusive and sustainable development with decent employment or decent work in our societies. That's what I could contribute for now.
Thank you very, very much, Omar, for such a comprehensive response. And I hope that we still have some time for the opinions and contributions coming from Elena on this important topic. Because for us, and well, many of us want to know about the relevance of the participation of adolescents in the plans and interventions that affect them. Elena, you have the floor. Very good questions. And I think this is extremely interesting. And yes, the answer is yes. Yes. But what is the role? What is the commitment of each one of the institutions? What type of adolescents? Many times from a developing world, it's difficult. Approaching adolescents so they can feel heard, asking them how they would like to have their education. If they are not well informed as to what is possible, this could be in vain. I wouldn't want to consult if we do not have the ability to answer. So we need to make consultations, but it is important to know what is realistic. We need to know the capacities that institutions have to respond, to adapt to programs, to have the budget. With this contextual information, we can do an open consultation with responsibility, because here we're playing with a lot of things. And sometimes this could increase the lack of trust coming from adolescents on the adults and public institutions. So this is serious matter. So yes, we do need to consult, but we need to consult informed adolescents, adolescents that have the responsibility, or that make us feel that we have the responsibility to give back. It's not only a matter of placing a check mark on what was consulted. This is important. Excellent perspective and very good points to take into account. Now, dear panelists, we want to thank you for your contributions. Thank you for your participation. And I would like to thank our participants online. It was a great pleasure to be able to share with you the results of this research on inequalities, education, and child labor. As it was mentioned several times in this presentation, these are interconnected topics. These are complex topics, but in the end, we need to work together in all our sectors so we can respond and we can fight child labor. On behalf of the Technical Secretariat, on behalf of the Regional Initiative, we want to thank you once again for your time, your attention, and participation. And before wrapping up, I want to say that the executive summary and the publication is available in the ILO's website. We have the versions in English and Spanish available. So if you can, please take a moment to go through these reports in detail so you can apply the experiences and good practices that we heard today to respond to child labor and school dropout in your own countries. Once again, thank you for your time and attention. And we wish you a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Recording stopped.